Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. Today I have a naked life story with Mike. Welcome, Mike, from freezing Brooklyn. I'm in freezing
Yeah,
Colorado.
thanks so much for having me, Annie, and thank you for everything you've done. Your book and the podcast, in particular, been a great help to me over the last year. So it's really an honor to be on. Really a great opportunity. So thanks.
Oh, it's so cool. It's so cool to have you. So tell me where, back me right up to the beginning. Where did it all sort of start for you?
Okay, sure. So I grew up in a suburb of Boston. I don't specifically remember my first drink, but I think it was around eighth or ninth grade, and was the type of thing where it was like, me and a bunch of friends snuck some terrible liquor out of my parents' liquor cabinet, like some Bushmills or some schnapps or something, and then started drinking at an early age. I grew up an Irish Catholic, big Irish Catholic family outside of Boston, and so it was a big drinking family. My parents both drank a lot, but my parents are both very successful, supportive parents, and had a great life in terms of, we had a house in Cape Cod growing up, and there's a lot of family always around, a lot of friends, a lot of social gatherings. But of course, drinking was always a big part of a lot of those different types of activities and gatherings. And being kind of like an Irish Catholic family, I think there was a lot of, sort of repression going around. And so alcohol could kind of be, a shortcut to, opening up to people or being more social, and kind of a coping mechanism as well. But in high school, my friends and my friend group and I would drink a lot. And, when I look back on it now, I kind of set the blueprint for myself in terms of, what my life would be like for the next 20 years from like 16 to 36, which is, I would try to be this responsible, kind of quieter type of person during the week, get my work done, study, get pretty good grades, keep people off my back, play sports. And then on the weekend, I would kind of transform into this party animal, if you will, and kind of set this blueprint of, binge drinking kind of every weekend. So it was a big part of my life in high school. My friends and I started smoking weed and, experimenting with other drugs at that time. But, I kept things together, and, even back then was able to maintain a sort of balance between, partying, if you will, and school. And so that really continued all the way through college. I went to a small liberal arts school in the Northeast, and no shortage of partying there, and a lot of drinking, big drinking school, and that really continued through college. And then right after college, moved to New York City, got a job here. I've lived here for 15 years now, and a lot of my friends that I went to college with moved here right after college too, and we just kind of kept the party going for a lot of years. And it was really fun, throughout the 20s, you'd kind of work, and I'd live this, what a lot of people wear as a badge of honor. And now looking back, it really wasn't so much, but this type of weekend warrior lifestyle, and when I was younger, I could handle it. But then as I started to, get into my 30s, the hangover started getting worse, and, my tolerance would get a lot higher, and, I'd drink so much more over the weekends, as I got into my 30s. And then, a few things started to happen, which is like, as I got into my 30s, I'd go out and, you just kept doing the same things, over and over again. And it just kind of felt like a lot of my friends around me were starting to have kids. They were, pursuing different jobs, starting families, moving out of New York City. And I was just, kind of felt like I was stuck on this hamster wheel of, I wasn't growing and changing, and I was just hitting the same bars over and over again. And in your book, something I really identified with was, you talked about how life kind of becomes this small, boozy Groundhog's Day, and things start, in a way started to feel like that, a lot for me. And then, so, kind of 2 years ago and getting into 2017 is really when a few things happened that started to change, in my life, that started my drinking and ramping up, but then also kind of started me on the path I've been on now to sobriety. The first was really a practical reason, and that was that my company offered us the opportunity to work from home 1 day a week. And so I chose Mondays, not really to like kick off my week, with a nice productive work day from home, but really so that I could keep drinking on Sundays and, not have to go into the office on Monday mornings, so hungover. And so, every weekend then I kind of added Sunday on to drinking, and every weekend became like a 3-day bender. I'd get out of work on Friday, sometimes even leaving work to meet a friend at the bar, and then you'd start drinking at happy hour at the bar. Sometimes you'd get dinner, sometimes you wouldn't. Keep drinking all night. Sometimes we would start do cocaine to keep drinking, which in retrospect was completely unnecessary. But then you'd get up on Saturday, you'd feel real crappy, hungover, and you'd hit a brunch with friends and you'd start drinking, Bloody Marys, and then maybe you'd go out to a bar in the afternoon and start drinking. Plenty of people do that in this city, but for me, this was like every single weekend. This was kind of the blueprint, and so then on Sundays, I would keep drinking then too, whether it was a football game. Now that I didn't have to go into the office, I'd drink more beers on Sunday, or you'd go meet friends at a bar for, quote, Sunday fun day, and keep drinking throughout Sundays. And so, I'd wake up every Monday morning, like totally incapacitated from the weekend's drinking, feeling horrible, be like sweating out alcohol, and I'd force myself to get up and kind of do the bare minimum of work to get by. But, every Monday I was like miserable for at least a year, probably, even longer. And at the same time, 2 other personal things were happening in my life that were more serious personal issues. The first was that my dad, who had been battling life-threatening illness. He was diagnosed with a rare disease called amyloidosis, which affects, the protein, abnormal protein builds up in your tissues and organs. And so he had to undergo a stem cell transplant and chemotherapy. And, he had his last rites read several times. He had to have a kidney transplant. And so, his illness in 2017, he'd been battling for a lot of years, but he was spending months in and out of the hospital, and things had really taken a turn for the worse. And so, I think I drank a lot more as a way to cope with that and kind of numb the pain I was dealing with from that. And the second thing that was happening was that my wife and I had been trying unsuccessfully to have a baby for about a year. So we had gotten married and had been trying, and we had just started this journey of meeting with the fertility doctor and going into the whole infertility world. And so in the fall of 2017, we were getting ready to go into our first cycle of IVF, and, I was still partying like every weekend was like a bachelor party or something. So definitely, not a good look for me at the time. And so all of this was really ramping up until one weekend in September in 2017 that, I kind of call like my fateful weekend where my life really changed. And I want to kind of walk through the weekend in a little bit of detail, just because I think it was really encapsulates kind of the microcosm of some of the reasons I drank, why it becomes a problem. What's that?
The details are great. Yeah, I love to hear the specific. Really helpful.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that happened, and, when I've read your book now, is you talk about the moderation trap. And so I would go into some certain weekends, like planning not to drink very much and have a chill weekend. And then I was the type of drinker where once I started, it was kind of off to the races. But this weekend was a bit of an example of that. My wife was planning to, she had to go away for work for a week on Sunday morning. And so our plan going in was to just have a chill weekend, hang out together and spend time together before she flew to Seattle for a week for work. And so that Friday night, I got off of work. We had planned to just have dinner in the neighborhood. And as was kind of routine, I stopped at a bodega on the way home and picked up a whole bunch of beer to stock the fridge for the weekend. And then I walked down, left the apartment, dropped that off the apartment, walked down the street to go pick up some wine for my wife. I remember I was walking down the street, and on the corner of my street, there was, a group of people gathered outside of a building, and there was I was wondering what they were doing. I looked over, they were kind of chatting with each other, and there was a sign that said AA and an arrow pointing down the stairs. to the basement. And I remember thinking to myself, I should just walk in there right now. But, I didn't, and I was terrified to do that and, enter that whole world. And I had kind of built up this thing in my mind that I didn't need that I could handle it. And so I kept walking, very, straight contrast, kept walking right to the liquor store to buy the bottle of wine for my wife. And then, while I was there, though, it was kind of classic drinker thinking. I remember, I said, well, let me pick up a bottle of vodka just in case too. So I grabbed a bottle of vodka as well, brought it back home, I started having beers before my wife got home. We went out to dinner. And then, even after, I had a couple of cocktails at dinner. So we were trying to have a few, a chill night, but I was already kind of drinking a lot. Then when we got home, my wife went to bed and I stayed up drinking more by myself, which was something I would tend to do a lot. And it kind of plays into this story a little later in a minute. And so, I kind of stayed up drinking more beers by myself, listening to music and, for no reason really, just I kind of, kept the party going. So on Saturday afternoon, we had a party to go to, which was a friend of my wife's from work. And so, I didn't know anyone at this party. And so this is an example of, social anxiety, I think played in a lot to the reason I drank. And so I can kind of be shy or introverted when I'm in like a new situation like that, like I'm sure a lot of people are. And so, I bought a 12-pack of beer to bring to the party, and, we were there for a couple hours, and I just remember like feeling so uncomfortable if I didn't have a beer in my hand. And so, I probably drank like 8 beers in the couple hours we were at this party. And, my wife and I were at dinner after. I kept drinking more there. And I remember kind of looking at me and be like, why are you drinking so much? It's just us hanging out. And, I know now, I was addicted and just kind of, this type of drinker where I couldn't stop once I started. But, she was right. So fast forward to Sunday morning. My wife flew off to Seattle, and, I'm from Boston, so I'm a big Patriots fan. And I have a lot of friends that I grew up with that actually live here in Brooklyn. And so it was kind of our Sunday ritual that we'd all get together, watch football. And since I, was able to work from home, a lot of times it would get out of hand. And so this day was no exception. Had friends come over at about noon. I remember specifically saying to one friend, something like too early to crack one. Of course, he said no. And, we started drinking at noon. And, by like 4 o'clock, 4:30, the Patriots game was over. All the beer had run out. And I said, well, I have this bottle of vodka that I just bought just in case. So we cracked that open and, we're all hanging out, making vodka sodas. And, this is when, things get really blurry. And basically I had started to black out. And, I think eventually we finished the bottle of vodka. Me and a couple other friends decided it'd be a great idea to go down the street to the bar, down the street. So we hit the bar. At this point, I was like totally blacked out. And, I guess, just really embarrassed myself at the bar. I was like falling off the bar stool, trying to order shots. The bartender, essentially shut me off and asked me to leave. And I kind of stumbled home. And, if that had been the end of it, I probably would have woken up on Monday and just kind of carried on. Oh, another rough weekend. But what was different this time is that, I got home and decided to keep the party going by myself, like I, had done Friday night and many nights before. But this time I decided to post a couple Instagram videos of myself, drunkenly blasting music in my living room and, really embarrassing. Like I couldn't bring myself to watch them after, but apparently I was like lying on the floor in one. And, I can kind of laugh about it now, but it was in the moment, at the time it was so painful. And it kind of reminded me, I think of like 10 years ago, this video went kind of viral of David Hasselhoff, where his daughter had taken a video of him drunkenly eating a cheeseburger on the floor. And, that kind of, she had taken it to inspire him to quit drinking. And so this was kind of my David Hasselhoff moment, except I had taken the video myself and put it out there for the whole world to see, or at least all my friends to see. And, and passed out in my bed, and I was totally blacked out. Don't remember any of this. So I woke up the next morning and, just felt like a truck of alcohol had run over my body. And, just had a piercing headache, but also had this like crippling sense of shame, and just something felt different. Like, oh man, I did something really stupid last night, didn't I? And then I looked over at my phone, and my phone was blowing up. There's angry text messages from my wife, and a lot worse things were said, but the gist of it was like, never post on Instagram when you're drunk. I have coworkers and family that follow you, and I was getting text messages from friends I was with the day before, like, "Are you alive?" And people I hadn't even seen in a long time are like, "Are you okay?" And
Oh my goodness.
that it started like coming to the real. I deleted the videos and immediately shut down my Instagram account, and deleted the evidence, but the damage was there. And I had this kind of moment where I realized, this is different this time, and I really need to do something about this. I need to, I need to stop drinking. And I remember texting that to my wife and thinking, she probably doesn't even believe me. But in that moment, I really, truly meant it for probably the first time in my life. And so I started Googling, and I wanted to like shut my phone off and, close the door, draw the shades, all of that, and never face the world again. But I was motivated and desperate to try to do something to help myself. So I started Googling. I actually looked up that AA meeting I had just walked past that Friday night. I was on Reddit, and I found this forum called Stop Drinking, and someone had mentioned that they had, read your book and how much it had helped her. And so I was able to immediately download it. And, it's like the closest thing I'll have to an epiphany. It just really spoke to me in that moment. It was exactly what I needed, and really started me on this journey of sobriety and recovery. And that was, about 13 and a half months ago. So hasn't been perfect, but, that was day one of deciding to make a big change in my life.
Oh, that's so cool. It's getting me emotional. I hear these stories all the time, but I don't know. Sometimes I think that I don't know. I love I can't talk, the detail of, I was there with you. I mean, I was like seeing the street in my house where I remember passing AA meetings in Brooklyn and walking home when, in apartments. And I remember the bodega where I bought the beer and the liquor store where I bought the wine. And then it's like, but we just need a bottle. I mean, wow, that's like really powerful.
Yeah.
That's so cool. What a good story. It's just amazing because I think we're all telling the same story. We're just living it out like individually, and we're not, talking about it. So it's so great when we can come together and really talk about it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
how have things gone in New York City? I know I've had a few guys actually quit drinking in New York City. Well, lots and lots, but people who have actually been on the podcast, and girls, and I know and I live there, so I know can be really tough from a social perspective and work and all that sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the toughest things, first, is, for me too, as someone who kind of experiences social anxiety or, had used alcohol as a crutch in social situations, it's hard for sure. One of the things that I would do though is, I was very much like a yes man, when I was drinking a lot, and I would go out and do anything and say anything because you could kind of make anything into a party. And, I would also, in New York City, you could always find a way to incorporate alcohol into like any and everything you do. And so, I remember like, even going to the movie theater here in Brooklyn, there's a bar in the movie theater now and you can drink during the movie, or you go to the park and we'd bring beers. And so, that's still going on, and a lot of my friends are still doing that. But, seltzer water has become my best companion. And, I don't go out as much as I used to, and that's okay. I say no to a lot of things. I've kind of realized that I need to really focus on, things that I really want to do. But with that said, I still go out to parties. And, what I find is that, for me anyway, a lot of the anxiety and fear that I have going into it is worse than when you actually get there. And I've heard other people in your podcast talk about this. It's like, it's like going to be the biggest thing in the world. And then you show up and, sometimes you don't even have to talk about it. You just order a soda water or something and no one even says anything, or you just say, I don't feel like drinking tonight. And so, in what I've found, and as advice for others, like at first it was really hard, and then you need reps like anything in life. And so the more you do it and the more you go out and you put yourself in that situation, the better and more comfortable you feel. And, I still go out to a lot of live music, and I used to spend the whole time going back and forth from the, to the bar, getting, or the bathroom, buying beer and that kind of thing. And now I just go and enjoy it. And so it can be hard. Alcohol's all around you, but, you just have to find a way to, put yourself out there and not be afraid to, keep on with the path that you're on.
Yeah, I love that. Just like you need reps. Like that's just so true. You just need reps. It's absolutely true. And then it becomes completely and totally effortless. Recently, and I just shared this, we had a live Naked Mind event last, about, I'd say 2 weeks ago now. And it was the first time I sort of shared this framework, but it's worth talking about because so much of what you've said just fits so perfectly into this framework. But I was really looking at what is our path? What is our journey from becoming aware of this to completely mastering it? And of course, like at the beginning of the path, we really have the stage one, step one is just being unaware, like not really knowing that alcohol is the thing. And I think that's where so much of the anxiety about deciding to stop drinking comes from. Because I know for me, alcohol was not the thing that was the problem. Alcohol was the thing that was keeping my life together. It was the duct tape. It was like the glue, And so when it was threatened, I felt really, really uncomfortable and uneasy because there was no awareness that alcohol might be the issue, right? And so that actually all the things that are the problems in my life were really sourced and created by the alcohol. I was totally unaware. And then you hit that point of awareness, and your moments of awareness, I mean, there were a few, but the awareness is always painful. And the awareness is like, oh my gosh, because you go from thinking like this thing that I think is helping is actually an enemy, but I also think it's helping. And I don't have any idea how to get out of this or how to unwind this. And then I think you move from the moment of awareness really to knowledge. And I think that's where like this naked mind comes in, is like, look, I think in the moment of awareness, what you need to know is that there's hope and that it's not your fault. It's your responsibility, but it's not your fault. You were just born a human being in our society where alcohol is more advertised than, anything else in America, and in very egregious ways. And it's addictive to human beings, just as addictive as any other drug. And so you need to understand that like you're one of just millions and millions of people caught up in this with this exact same story. It's not your fault, and that there's definitely a solution. And so you get the knowledge. And then step 5 is action. And action is where you actually have to put it down long enough to get the reps. And I think a lot of people get tripped up on step 5 because step 5 can be really scary. If you're wavering, if you go to that park, I mean, I remember Park Slope, the, symphonic orchestra or some play in the park, and like, Trader Joe's first, all my wine, all my cheese.
Very familiar with that. Yeah, we go to Prospect Park a lot.
Yeah. I'm like really very whatever. I'm living the life, right? And really I'm just using it as another excuse to get drunk and not remember the walk home. And by the way, one of those times, walk home with my bottle of wine and get almost arrested because you're not allowed to have an open bottle of wine, at least when I was living there. And so got a ticket, and I thought that was going to ruin my entire career. I had I forget what the ticket was, an open container.
Yeah, I got one of those just sitting on a stoop in Park Slope one time drinking and being really worried about it. Absolutely, yep.
So much anxiety about that ticket, having to deal. I'm like, I'm in the New York City court system, like totally. So much drama. Yeah, and then but if you go into any of those situations, if you go to Prospect Park and you have a maybe, it's going to be a yes. Like you're going to get overwhelmed and crushed by everything around you and all your past habitual behaviors and all the societal influences. And so the reps of just making that decision beforehand and just knowing, because step 5 then was that, I think there's 5 steps in my little thing. I just wrote it, so I don't have it in front of me, but step 5 is then mastery. And mastery comes, I think the soonest mastery can come is where after, right around a year, when you've really been through every single event at least once. And I think and then I think it just gets better and better and better. But I would say step 1 through step 4, even action, like they take effort still. You still have to make the decisions. They take decision making. And then you get into this place of mastery, and I would call mastery like effortless enjoyment of the change that you've made, where it's absolutely effortless. It would take more effort to have a drink than to not have a drink. It would take more effort to go down that road than to not go down that road. And you just completely enjoy like the new life. And I guess to anybody listening, like that is where it goes if you put in the reps. And that's what got me on that whole tangent in the first place. But I've never said it that way, and I just love it. Like you just need reps, and then you can get to where you've mastered the change, and everything changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and I remember being, and Christmas, and being so nervous, last year as I was doing my first sober Thanksgiving, since I was a kid. And, but it was also a good reminder because 2 years ago, I went out partying with my friends the night before Thanksgiving, and then woke up hungover and, started drinking at my brother's house and got so drunk that I basically blacked out at the end of the night there. And so, it was also kind of a reminder of, how far I've come in the last couple of years. But this year, I'm not nervous at all going into it because, I've had a lot more experience and reps, and also, other people, people now know that I'm a non-drinker, and that helps. But even going into even now, going into situations where I don't know people or maybe offered a drink, it's still difficult for me. I'm not motivated to drink, but it's just hard for me personally to navigate those situations and kind of come out as a non-drinker. And that's something I'm, still working through. And one of the things I identified so much with in your book, or at least in something I've read of yours, is that, the moderation trap. And for me, I even kind of had an experience with this. And so, I talked about my dad's health, and, in the first part of my story. And unfortunately, about just before 6 months of me getting sober, my dad passed away. And, he was such a strong, supportive presence in my life. And I'm so happy I got that at that time with him in those last 5.5, 6 months. But, I made it all the way up until the day of the funeral, alcohol free. But then, after giving the eulogy at the funeral, I caved right afterwards. And I remember, my cousin Steven turning to me and, saying, like, you ready? It was like 10:30 in the morning, and yep. And so, started drinking that day. And so I had this, brief day, an interlude where, I caved and I drank again on that day. But I remember waking up the next morning and feeling, that familiar, horrible hangover feeling was back. And I even turned to my wife and said, alcohol is poison, and, but, I was in such pain that I kind of was seeking that numbing feeling that alcohol gave me. And so I decided 2 days later to try to kind of do an experiment with moderation. And so we were at, it was the Final Four, and I tried to have a few beers, and that familiar endless thirst was coming back. And I could kind of sense, like, the second I was finishing one, I wanted another. And I just knew I had the tools and the knowledge and everything that you had written and everything I'd listened to and all the memoirs I'd read, that I knew that it was a trap and that I would fall right back into it. And so that night I resolved to become alcohol free again. And, now it's been 7.5 months since then. And so I'm, so happy that was only a very brief interlude that I was able to get through.
Those things, they give us so much knowledge, for where we're going next. And I think that's so important. And I think it's really heartbreaking and counterproductive when people see things like that as failure, because I like to give the example of my daughter. She's 18 months and she's learning to walk. And I mean, the number of times that she's fallen, well, now she's learning to run. It's a
Yeah.
little bit dated example, but now in running, the number of times she's fallen, it's the same principle, but she's not going to stop learning to run. Like she's got her focus. She's not going to get discouraged. She, might get frustrated for a minute, but she's just going to keep moving forward. And she wouldn't be learning to master that without falling. And I think that's just, such a vital piece of this all, is that sometimes we put so much focus on like amount of time and all this stuff, but it doesn't actually matter as long as you really have the mindset that like all of this is part of my path and part of my journey, and I'm going to honor and accept it, instead of really, beating myself up, which just, guess what, that just leads to all sorts of bad places. Because there was one thing, and this is, just the live event is top of mind for me, but I was really thinking like, what is the one thing? I mean, obviously my book has all the information. I'm coming out with another book, has all the information. My podcast has all the information. There's so much information out there. So what is the one thing that I could leave people with or contribute to people in this 2 days together that would really, like, what is the most life-changing and important thing possible? And it really, for me, boiled down to really reconnecting with the part of ourselves or the version of ourselves that we were when we were kids. And like my, again, 18-month-old daughter looks in the mirror and she's like, you, where have you been? And like, she's just so excited to see herself. There's no story in her head. There's none of the things other people have told her or things she's told herself or mistakes she's made. And I mean, that's like, we have this very, self-love is such a cliche term these days, but we have this very, very profound, innate, divine part of ourselves that is deeply in love with ourselves. And when we try to like deny that and not give ourselves that time and that space, and we beat ourselves up for mistakes, I mean, we just pull ourselves further from that than, really closer to it. So I just like how you described that entire thing. And I'm sorry about your father. That's heartbreaking. But it's really neat how you've learned and grown from that instead of just let it kind of trap you.
Yeah, I could see that it could maybe go to a dark place, but I'm able to really, as being able to deal with my grief and with the issues and the loss of my father with a really clear mind, and that was something even just a year ago I wouldn't have been able to do, and so I'm so happy I didn't fall back into the trap of drinking and to numb my pain again, for sure.
That's awesome. So let me ask you the question I always ask at the end. And that's really, what would you tell Mike of laying on the floor taking Instagram videos? It's fine, have a little vodka. What would you tell him about what it's like on this other side?
I think what I would say is, you don't have to live this way, but really, more importantly, that there is another way to live. I didn't really know another way. It never even occurred to me that you could go out to dinner and order a sparkling water. My whole life I had just lived this kind of one way where you just drank and socialized and all of that every single weekend. And, you don't have to wake up every single Monday feeling horrible, and that's just the way it is, that you are capable of changing, and that, things will be brighter on the other side. And, now my wife and I are, I'm there 100% for her as we deal with these fertility issues and, trying to start my own family. And, I can do this with a clear heart, and that's, no longer just like numbing myself and not being present every single weekend by chasing, artificial highs with alcohol. I feel like really the true joy and spirit of life was right there in front of me this whole time. And, I really just had to give up alcohol to see it. And so, I want to say thank you to you so much for everything you've done for me. And, I'm not sure where I'd be if I hadn't have come across your book that day. So, thank you for everything you've done.
Well, of course. Thank you for being here. It's been awesome. Such a good journey. So inspiring. And I know that, so many people will really gravitate to it. So I really, really appreciate it, Mike.
I hope so. Thanks so much, Annie.
All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. This has been Annie Grace with This Naked Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more at thisnakedmind.com. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps us spread the word.